History is something we teach, yet for some, it can seem boring. I say, may it never be. History is a story, and humans like stories. History is not boring. I believe the presentation can be boring, but the content is not boring. In today's episode, I will give you some ideas and rationale for making your time studying history come alive. Hey, homeschool mom, I'm Erika Sagert on the Intentional Homeschooler podcast with more actionable steps and encouragement for your homeschooling journey so you can confidently and intentionally homeschool your children without sacrificing your sanity. Grab a pen and paper, your favorite cup of brew, and let's get started. So, why do we study history anyway? You've probably heard some things like we learn from the past. Well, that's one reason. I have several others as well. So first, we learn from the past. Second, we can see the difference between a hero and a villain. When we look at people and see how they act and how they solve problems and conflict and all of that, we can determine whether or not they are a hero or a villain just by what they do. So that's an important aspect of history. Number 3, it helps us understand human nature. So we can resonate with them. We can learn from those in the past and how they acted. Number 4, it makes us more resilient because we can see how life was before our modern conveniences. And number 5, it connects us with others. I'm sure, we could come up with lots of other reasons to study history, but these are 5 to think about today. Now, there are some problems with history education. So many of us are concerned about history revisionism. That perhaps is one of the reasons why you chose to homeschool your children. So history revisionism is when educators and leaders often change the stories in our history to fit into our own narratives. It can make teaching history really tricky. So who can you trust? And how much time do you have to figure out who you can trust? What historians should I listen to? I believe this should be prayerfully considered. The fight over history education seems to be over the interpretation and the emphasis of history. It's about how the facts are interpreted and what is emphasized. I don't know about you, but I certainly want to be as close to the truth as possible. It's impossible to remove all of your interpretation and emphasis. We're all going to come to that. We're going to come to our study of history with some sort of perspective, but we want to remain as close to the truth as humanly possible. I personally don't want to be caught slanting the stories to fit my narrative, and I don't want to fall prey to believing the slant of someone else. It can be quite overwhelming, but one thing that helps is to read primary sources. So a primary source is an original object or document. So it's the raw material or firsthand information or source material that is closest to what is being studied. So think archaeological digs. So some of the things that they find in the ground, those are original objects. They study those to learn how people lived during that time. They have different dating mechanisms and things. I'm not going to get into that today, but that would be a primary object, a cup, a plate, a chariot wheel, anything, just things that they find help them learn about what was going on. That is a primary object. A primary document is something that was written by an eyewitness. So somebody who was there wrote it down. Now, of course, that's going to be more difficult in ancient history, but in modern history, we have lots of primary sources. Those primary sources help us to get an honest view of what was happening at the time. So one example of this is it's really good to put two primary sources next to each other. For example, in our American history during the Civil Rights Movement, of course, we had lots of different reactions to that movement. I suggest I did this with my kids. We looked at Booker T. Washington versus W.E.B. Du Bois. They had very different responses to the Civil Rights Movement. I think it's an awesome idea to look at both of those, read both of their autobiographies, and look at what their opinions were. What was their suggestion in response to the Civil Rights Movement? And you can do some critical thinking, think about where you land, what you think would be a good response. That way, you're looking at directly at somebody who was active during that time and see what they thought about what was going on. They were eyewitnesses to what was going on. In a sense, we need to become detectives when studying history. Biographies and firsthand experiences are so helpful. Find some historians that have differing opinions and compare their points of view. Always read and study with critical thinking. I know it's exhausting, but you can do it because it is so important. Okay, now I want to get to some practical ideas for teaching history. Number 1, first and foremost, when teaching history, begin with your family history. Dig a little deeper and find out what your origins are. I found out my family's story and my husband's family story are very similar. Both of our families immigrated to America after living under Catherine the Great in Russia. They were Germans, but they were living in Russia. And there's a lot more to the story, and I don't have time to tell it all here, but it is fascinating to find out how your family came to America. How far back were you here? It gives us and our students a sense of identity. It shows how beautifully unique we are. It connects us with others, and it makes us more resilient when we realize how difficult it was for our ancestors. Thankfully, my grandma wrote down our story, and when I read how difficult it was for my family to come here, I have great regard and great respect for them. And I'm thankful that they took the initiative to come to this wonderful country that we live in. Now, as far as specific curriculum, for elementary, I cannot recommend Veritas Press enough. Now, it's not laid out super succinctly. Like, you have to be a little bit creative in how you want to use this curriculum. But what I love about it, and others that are similar, Story of the World is also very similar to Veritas Press. The thing that I like about it most is it teaches history in a chronological way, and it integrates biblical history along with ancient history. So when I taught my kids history, I learned history. Like, I took history in school, but when I taught my children, that's when I really learned history and really fell in love with history. I love that this curriculum intertwines that biblical and ancient history. I always have believed that the Bible was true, but when I saw that Abraham and Sarah were traveling when the pyramids were being built, it just made it that much more real to me to see where it all fits in. The Olympics were first started not far from when Jesus was walking on the earth. It just really gives a lot of background and intertwines those two histories. I love it. It's amazing. So they have these cards that you work through each year, and they have they start with ancient Egypt, they go to Greece, they go to the Reformation. You study in the Reformation and you study things like the martyrs, which strengthens your faith because you see how these martyrs died for our faith. And of course it's worth believing, because if they died for their faith, that shows me that it's worth dying for. They wouldn't go through that if they didn't believe it was true. So anyway, I had a timeline on the wall. We put different events on the wall each year. And so we could see the chronology of history. Now, if you don't have room on a wall for these timeline figures, you could always do it in the notebook. But I say, for those of us who are super visual, it's always really good to get it on the wall. So it's very hands-on history. My kids ended up making a life-size mummy. We painted frescoes when we were studying ancient Greece, all kinds of things. But it's so hands-on. You read trade books. Like I often just went to the library and checked out all of the books that we needed for this history. There are activities in the curriculum as well that will get you along. There's a feast. There's, like I said, life-size mummies, frescoes. There's all kinds of hands-on activities. I say make it hands-on. It's fun. It's so much more fun that way. And when you can have an experience while learning, you will remember it way more than if you're just reading about it. I also say lots of movies. A movie, you can get in a lot of information in 2 hours. It takes a little bit longer to read a book, but also, read those books, read those biographies, those stories of people who came before us. It really makes it come alive, and it is fun to learn about other people. And that's what history is. It's learning about other people. In high school, I highly recommend Dave Raymond's work. You can find him at Compass Classroom. So for high school, he has American history, modernity, Christendom, and antiquity. So how he does it is there are videos to watch. There are readings of mostly primary sources when possible. Of course, primary sources are more difficult with ancient history because it was so long ago. We don't have as much written down. We didn't have printing presses back then to document that information. But he uses as many primary sources as possible. And he, too, has lots of great hands-on ideas. So every year, there's an hour project where the students spend a certain amount of hours and they choose a project that they want to spend time on. It could be a meal of whatever time period that they're studying. Perhaps they spend X amount of hours on preparing a meal from that time period. It could be building a ship based on some war or some whatever is going on, a project. There's one where somebody carved a gun of one of the military officers in whatever section that they were studying. They could make a movie. They could create a website with information about what they were learning. So Dave Raymond's history suggests these wonderful projects. There's even a map project where they imitate an ancient map. They recreate it. There's one where they find one of the masters and they create artwork. So definitely a lot of great information with the videos and the readings, but then there's a lot of hands-on projects as well. Okay, so I just scratched the surface on history today, but I say the most important takeaways from today's episode are: number one, be vigilant in choosing your history resources. Be a detective. Find a few historians that you can trust. Number two, remember, history is a story, so focus on the stories. Number three, keep it active, keep it engaging, keep it real with projects, biographies, movies, and really good stories. Enjoy the process. Learn right along with your students. Make it come alive. I know my kids still, they love history. They dig. They're telling me more now than I ever even taught them because I created this love of learning history, and so they're just taking it and running with it. It will enrich your life and help you understand many things. If any of this resonates with you, you have further questions, or you want to find out more about the work I do at Hope Learning Center, book a virtual coffee chat with me. The link to my calendar is in the show notes. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as right here, where a brand new episode will drop every other Thursday. Until next time, you've got this, Mom.